Welcome back. We're Rage Badger Gaming. Today we're going over another deep dive video for the Spellweaver.
Before we get into the video, just remember, if you like our content, be sure to subscribe and check out our Twitter and Patreon, which we'll be putting in the description below.
Alright, let's get into the Spellweaver. She relies on elements and she's a ranged spellcaster. She can do area of effects, targeting multiple people, and do some crowd control and stun things.
And I kind of feel that that's where her biggest strengths lie, in all crowd control, not only the best crowd control in stuns, and although she doesn't have a lot, she has one really good card that stuns, and she's got a lot of really good AoEs, especially early on. And even later, she has the best AoE in the game. So she does have really big loss attacks early on. You can all of her losses seem to give an element, so you can use stuff like Frost Armor, Flame Strike, and Mana Bolt to kind of use as interim filler attacks that burn those elements. And once you get to later levels, you're going to want to create more elements without having to lose cards. So, and despite that, even though we did mention Mana Bolt, that's not a card you're going to be rotating out of your hand ever.
I'm still using it level 9.
Yeah, and not necessarily because you want the attack too, it's the initiative 7.
Some really good lost cards for the Spellweaver include Impaling Eruption, Fire Orbs, and Aid from the Aether.
Yeah, and you shouldn't be so hesitant to play lost cards because of Reviving Aether. So, although I'm a little hesitant on a lot of classes for losses, I think especially the early Spellweaver, you don't really need to consider it as much. So you're going to be doing them twice, which is great.
When I first was playing Spellweaver, I was not managing my cards as well as I do now. You kind of want to be careful using lost cards early in the scenario and kind of save them for the end, and then use Reviving Aether to get them back.
Yeah, and you can actually resummon that Summon Mystic Ally on Aid from the Aether, and it's great because since it is a ranged summon, it won't necessarily do really dumb stuff, like run to melee 1 retaliates. And he's going to be hitting for an attack 3 every turn if you can just keep him alive, and since he's ranged, it's a little bit more manageable. And all the other cards can target 3 or potentially 4 things for an attack 3, all potentially doing a lot of damage in one round.
We'll touch on this later, but Fire Orbs is a good card to enhance. It has lots of pip options.
Yes.
A good card or crowd control is Cold Fire.
Cold Fire!
And I always say don't use my Frost, so I can use this Cold Fire card, use that Frost to stun. And this does have a pip to add another target, which is potentially awesome.
Yeah. The cool part is, even though it is a weak attack 1, if you do have Fire Up, and we can get that later, you can do a multi-attack 3, which is pretty strong. Not great, but it's just as strong as the other options we were talking about, Fire Orbs and Impaling Eruption. But this time it's not on a loss. It does require elements. And if you have Frost Empowered, and that's really the one you want, is the stun. So it's almost like, if you can get it set up, a reusable, stunning Fire Orbs. They do need to be a little bit clustered, but as she said, you can add a pip and make it up to 4 hexes, and that gives you a little leeway on what you can hit.
And this would be a good candidate to get back from your discard when you use your stand potion.
Yeah, we'll be touching on some of the items later, but you're definitely going to want one, especially with a small hand size.
A couple of cards you can play to help empower your Cold Fire is Chromatic Explosion and Engulfed in Flames, since you can empower elements to help it. Or you can use items, of course, that you can get at the shop.
Yeah, not only that, but these are really good cards because if you actually need any element, the bottom half of Chromatic Explosion allows you to move and empower anything you need. A lot of times you're probably going to be using this for that Frost that you need for Cold Fire, but the top and Engulfed in Flames, you can use it both on the same turn, Empower both, and then follow the next one up with a Cold Fire. Every time you rest, you can get that back and do it infinitely until you, of course, exhaust. But you probably shouldn't have so many turns in a scenario that you hit that.
Now we're going to talk about the best card for the Spellweaver. It's a level 9 card called Inferno. Are you in a room with a bunch of monsters? Play this card and they all die.
Yeah, the thing is, you can attack 3 on all the monsters. There is a little bit of friendly fire. And if you do have fire empowered, which you have a multitude of ways to empower it, it's an attack 4 on all the monsters. The cool part is, if you set this up correctly, you can get into a room, kick in the door, and then potentially the next turn use the bottom half of Mana Bolt and then the top half of Inferno. If you enhance that, which we'll talk about later, you'll have an advantage on everything in the room. You can also use Eagle Eye Goggles for that, but in this case I think we're going to favor Mana Bolt. And if you use a Stand Potion, you might be able to do it again. There's another item you can use with Inferno, which we'll talk about later, but you can potentially just on average, between the how you can stack a perk deck by level 9, you're going to be looking at, if there's 5 enemies in a room, you can do a non-loss 25 to 26 damage average, assuming fire's empowered. And you can do that in 2 turns back, assuming no one dies. And that's 50 damage over 2 card plays.
Then go invisible with your invisibility cloak.
Yeah. So it's a really good card. It's not, obviously some scenarios isn't going to be amazing, but there are some rooms where, like, here's 9 guys, and you go, oh boy, let me tell you something, Inferno. Since a lot of these attacks affect multiple targets at once and produce a really big attack action, that makes power potions extra valuable, especially on Inferno where you can attack everything in a room, but especially like Cold Fire where you can target 4 hexes. It just becomes that much more valuable. The problem is there's not a lot of handed weapons because you see some of them that are just not useful for you, but Piercing Bow will really help you out because you have a lot of things in the attack 3 to 4 range, so once you encounter things like Vermling Shamans and Flame Demons and Wind Demons, you suddenly, all your damage gets stifled. So potentially once a scenario you can either break through that. You can use a Warhammer once you have Inferno to literally stun the whole room. It just buys your whole party 1 turn just to wail on him, and then with the Stand Potion you can do a double Inferno with that if you really want. It's not necessary, but it's one of those things where if you need 1 room dead and you don't want to take any damage, the amount of damage you can put in 2 turns knowing you're not getting attacked and just put everything into it, there's some scenarios that will just end. So enhancements. I know you've added a few on the Spellweaver already. I like Strengthen on the bottom of Mana Bolt, just because huge, really, really early initiative combined with the top half of your choice, just saying, hey, I'm this, whatever big attack I'm unloading, it's going to have advantage for the whole turn. And then since you can pair that with the bottom half, and it only applies till the end of next turn, your whole next turn will also be strengthened.
One enhancement that I did that I think is pretty common is the bottom half, the Reviving Ether, add and empower any element to that.
Yeah, and that really helps if you need, because there's so many elements that burn. Inferno burns fire, Cold Fire burns fire and frost. You have a multitude of level 1s that use any element. Gives you whatever you really need. And there's a few others in there. A Living Torch uses light. So.
Yeah, since you're always going to have Reviving Ether in your deck, in your hand, you're going to be using it in the meantime before you play the top half, adding something to the bottom half.
Yeah, get a little more bang for your buck. If you're going to have it in your hand and have it just not doing anything, obviously it's great for mobility, but now you add a little bit of extra utility.
Yeah.
Perks. So, the Spellweaver has a few, what I call really bad perks, and there's actually some really good ones in here. I really like all the ones that thin the deck out, and the Spellweaver's really lacking in that department. But you do have the ability to at least cycle into a better deck, and those replacing the -1s with +1s are definitely your first priority. However, there are some +2s that empower fire or empower frost, and those are top. You have to get them. Not only just because of the +2 damage, but sometimes you will luck into that fire or frost when you need it. You're not relying on that. You just want the +2 damage in place of it. In place of, a miss or a -1. And the more cards you end up adding to the deck, it ends up making the miss less common. there's a lot of random +1 in curse, +1 in wound, and then you don't want to really dip into those until you've removed 4 of the +0s. That will drastically improve your chance of getting those +2s, and because you have advantage, you're probably not going to be drawing the misses often if you use the strength on the Mana Bolt and potentially Eagle Eye and other stuff. It'll still happen, but probably not as often. And because you're going to be rolling with that, you're going to avoid those empowering elements you just don't care about with the chain, because probably it's never going to add up and they're just not worth it. Avoid those perks.
Yeah, and as we recently discovered, anything with a chain is ignored if you're strengthened or have an advantage.
Yeah, so you're like, I empower Earth and chain into it doesn't matter. You were going to get it anyway. So it rarely pays off. And not only that, but none of them are tied to fire or frost, the 2 elements you really want.
That does it for the Spellweaver. If you have any questions, let us know in the comments below, and like and subscribe. Bye.